My name is Dr. Jonathan Reed, and for 14 years I have watched the lights of Baltimore smear across rain-soaked windshields while driving home after midnight, the city breathing like a tired animal. At the St. Mary's Psychiatric Hospital, I wear the white coat the way a priest wears black, uniform and armor, pen and badge clipped close to the heart, a practiced calm in my voice. Patients teach you how to hold silence. Families teach you how to hold the pieces they bring in paper bags. What no one teaches is how to hold yourself when the room empties and the hum of the ventilation grows louder than your thoughts. I was 12 when my mother tied a scarf to the banister of our small house in Salem, Massachusetts, and left me with the quiet. My father folded into himself after that, a man of contained disasters, a jaw clenched through dinner, a bottle hidden under the sink. I learned early that grief rarely screams. It chooses the corners and the thresholds, the places your eyes skip. Years later, lectures at Harvard put names to what I already understood instinctively: obsession, dissociation, the biochemistry of sorrow. The data felt like a map through a country I had walked blind. In Baltimore, I built something resembling a life. I married an anesthesiologist who kept her hair in a severe bun, and we rented a narrow row house near Fells Point, close enough to the water that gulls argued on the roof at dawn. We broke apart quietly, the way ice breaks along a shoreline. No drama, only pressure and distance. What remained were my patient and the predictable choreography of the hospital, the clatter of carts, the antiseptic sting, the elevator that shuddered on the third floor as if unsure it wanted to ascend. I have sat across from veterans who could not sleep without a loaded pistol under the pillow, from mothers who washed their hands raw to keep their babies safe from microbes only they could see, from a preacher who feared his thoughts might slip through the stained glass and stain the congregation. I thought I had learned to set my face like a lighthouse, bright and steady no matter how the weather turned. I thought I had made a truce with the darker corners of the mind. The night the rain started early over the inner harbor, I was finishing notes in my office, a rectangle of fluorescent light afloat in the building's belly. A vending machine whirred down the hall, spitting out stale heat. I remember the taste of burnt coffee and the way the clock's second hand ticked like a distant metronome. I remember, too, a small thing, the sensation that someone stood just beyond the frosted glass of my door, not knocking, only listening. When I opened it, the corridor was a loop of linoleum and nothing else. We call these moments stress artifacts. The brain, starved of sleep and stuffed with other people's storms, invents shadows. That is what I told myself as I turned off the desk lamp and gathered my coat. Still, crossing the parking lot, the rain felt oddly warm, and in the mirror of my car I saw my face move a fraction before I did, as though the glass had already decided how I should look. I leaned closer, then laughed at my own reflection, and the sound fell flat in the cabin. By the time the call came from admissions, new intake from a truck stop off I-95, male, late 20s, disoriented, I had already filed away the evening as routine. There is a way you learn to do this, to press strangeness into the scrapbook of a long career. Yet as I walked back through the sliding doors and the warm hiss of recycled air, I caught the faintest echo, like a breath drawn in the wrong room. It was not a word, not yet, only a pressure along the spine, an old gravity. If I am honest, that is when the doubt began. Not in what I knew, but in the border where knowledge ends and something else begins. It was close to midnight when the call reached my office phone, the kind of hollow ring that carries differently in an empty building. Admissions had received a patient from the highway patrol, a young man found wandering a truck stop parking lot on Interstate 95. The police report described him as incoherent, unclothed, and speaking in voices that did not belong to him. That phrasing clung to me, voices that did not belong. It was the kind of description an officer might scribble down impatiently, but the words lodged in my mind like grit. I signed the intake forms with a pen that skipped, the ink refusing to settle on the page. As I descended to the observation wing, I felt that peculiar awareness, the sense of being shadowed by someone who stopped whenever I turned. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their vibration more felt than heard. When I reached the intake room, two orderlies stood stiffly at the door, their faces oddly pale for men accustomed to violence and chaos. Inside sat the patient, Daniel Harker. He was 28, though he looked older, the hollows beneath his eyes carved deep as if by years of sleeplessness. His skin was damp, streaked with dried rainwater and highway. He had been given a hospital gown, yet his posture was strangely formal, shoulders squared, hands folded too neatly in his lap, as though he were waiting for a sermon rather than a psychiatric evaluation. His gaze tracked me the moment I felt the weight of it land across my chest. "Daniel," I said, pulling the chair opposite. His eyes did not shift, but there was a subtle tightening in his jaw, like a muscle preparing for speech. "I'm Dr. Reed. I'll be assessing you tonight." For several seconds, silence filled the room. stretched so thin it felt brittle. Then, in a voice hoarse and low, he repeated my name, not as a question, not even as recognition, but as a statement, flat and inevitable. Dr. Reed. I asked the standard questions: orientation, memory, awareness of surrounding. His responses came halting, yet coherent enough to sketch the outline of a frightened man. He spoke of leaving Salem, of endless highway, of a buzzing in his ears that swelled until it drowned thought. But when I asked why he had been walking naked through the lot, his lips pulled back in something not quite a smile, and his throat tightened as if words were being forced up against their... The sound that followed did not belong in that. It was deeper than his chest could contain, layered, resonant like a subterranean vibration. It formed words, though not in the cadence of Daniel's earlier speech. The voice said, "You hear it too, don't you, doctor? The one behind your head." My hands froze on the clipboard. The lights overhead seemed to flicker, though perhaps it was only my vision narrowing. I asked him to clarify, forcing my tone to remain steady. But Daniel's mouth twisted further, his features stretched by the sound that kept spilling out, low and deliberate. "It has followed you since childhood." She knew. She listened until it broke her. The air in the room turned colder, a sharp contrast to the stale warmth of the hospital. I felt sweat bead along my spine. None of this was in the manual. No diagram or DSM classification could hold what I was hearing. Yet protocol demanded I write, so I scribbled notes with a hand that shook more than I wanted to admit. At last, the voice ceased, and Daniel slumped back, chest heaving, eyes closed as if emptied by the effort. When he reopened them, he looked younger, exhausted, almost pleading. "Please," he whispered in his own tone, "don't let it talk again." I ended the session, ordered observation, and left the room with the echo still inside my skull. In the hallway, one of the orderlies asked quietly, "Did you hear it, too?" I could not answer him. My mouth formed words of reassurance, yet beneath them lingered a truth I could not name. The voice had not merely filled the room, it had recognized me. I scheduled the formal evaluation for 1 a.m., when the building thins to a skeleton, and even the vending machines seemed to whisper. The observation room was the size of a motel bathroom. 2 chairs, a bolted table, a wall clock that ticked like a slow leak. I set the digital recorder between us, checked the red light twice, and folded my hands so he wouldn't see them tremble. Daniel sat upright, pupils wide, the hospital gown hanging off his shoulders like a borrowed skin. "Tell me what brought you here," I began, the line I have used 1,000 times. He stared past me at the one-way glass, as if something stood on the other side weighing him. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin, winded. "It wasn't me," he said. "It borrows." The word unsettled me in a way I couldn't name. I shifted to grounding questions. Date, place, name, coaxing him into the narrow hallway of certainty. He followed for a few steps, then stopped, head tilting as though listening to a frequency outside human range. The change came without warning. His jaw tensed. A pressure moved through his cheek, as though something beneath the skin had decided to rearrange him. His lips parted and a tone rolled out. Not a scream, not quite speech. A resonance that seemed to belong to the room more than to his throat. The recorder's levels spiked into red. He said my name, drawn out, deliberate. Jonathan, as if tasting it. I wanted to ask how he knew me, but the sound pinned the question to my tongue. I tried to interpose structure. "Daniel, do you hear a voice now?" Clinical, precise. He didn't blink. The timbre that answered was layered, like 2 voices offset by a fraction of a second. "He hears us," it said, and the fluorescent light above us gave a nervous flick. My scalp prickled. "Who is us?" I asked, too quickly. The mouth smiled without warmth. The ones she counted in the dark when the stairs creaked. 27 steps. A scarf, blue. The banister varnished sticky. I smelled lemon oil and a breath of winter air that could not have come from the sealed vent. There are details you guard like talisman. Hearing them spoken in that cadence felt indecent. I slid the Beck inventory across the table to steady myself. His hand, Daniel's hand, rested on the paper without touching it. The voice said, almost curious, "Do you think ink makes a cage?" A laugh, dry as split timber, rattled out. The clock inched forward. I realized I could not hear my own breathing above the hum, as if the room had learned to hold its breath. "What does it want?" I asked, violating my own rule not to grant agency to hallucination. For a moment, the face softened, and I saw the exhausted young man under, his eyes pleading. But the reply came from somewhere deeper, a rumble that crawled across the tabletop and into my wrist bones. "A mouth," it said. "A steadier one." I pushed my chair back hard enough to scrape the floor. The sound continued, unmoved. "She could not carry us." "You will." I stood, signaling the voice guttered out, leaving Daniel gasping as if he had run a distance without moving. He looked at me, bewildered, and whispered, "Did I say something?" I capped my pen, noticing the nib was bent and a thin line of black had bled into my palm like a vein. When I reached for the recorder, the timestamp had frozen at 1:13, though the clock read 1:21. I pressed stop and the counter lurched forward as if waking from a faint. In the hallway, the air felt warmer, too warm, and yet I could not stop shivering. I told the nurse to increase observation and to keep him on suicide watch. As I signed the order, the letters of my name broke apart into blots. I wiped my hand, but the stain remained, a faint bruise of ink beneath the skin. On my way back to the office, I passed the one-way glass. For a heartbeat, no more. I saw my own reflection seated where Daniel had been, my mouth opening to speak before I did. I played the recording alone in my office, the blinds half closed, the city's sodium haze seeping through the slats like old water. The red light on the device blinked with a patient heartbeat. At first it was only Daniel's breathing, the antiseptic rustle of fabric, my own cadence. Measured, professional. Then the sound thickened, as if the room itself had shifted closer to the microphone. The other voice entered like a bass note, faint enough to doubt until it wasn't. I felt it before I heard it, a pressure just behind the eyes, a small gravity that unseated the pens in their cup. I backed the tape up and let it roll again. The speakers produced a smear instead of words, a shimmer that made the air between me and the desk look slightly wavy, like heat over asphalt. When it finally formed syllables, my name, unspooled and satisfied, I hit pause with the reflex of someone slapping a wasp. Silence rushed in, loud and hot. I replayed the section 3, 5, 10 times. Each pass altered something I hadn't touched. The pitch dropped a fractional step, or a whisper bled in at the edges, or the room's hum learned a new harmony. I checked the recorder's time code. It crawled obediently forward now, as if the earlier seizure had been my private superstition. In the corridor, the motion sensor lights coughed awake as I walked to the tech office. Mark Shi, who could resuscitate any machine with a flathead screwdriver and a shrug, plugged the recorder into his workstation. "Signal contamination," he said, listening through cheap headphones. "Could be a transformer, could be your AC crying." When he handed the set to me, the distortion felt like weather pummeling a window. Present, impersonal, relentless. Only when the voice said, "She counted the steps," did the impersonal shatter. I flinched and slid the headphones off so fast they snapped my ear. I told myself to sleep before assigning meaning. At home, the row house stairwell exhaled its old wood smell, and the radiators clicked a calm little metronome. I drew the curtains, double-checked the latch, set the recorder on the kitchen table like a contraband relic I might need to deny. In the bathroom mirror, the glass fogged from the shower. As I wiped a circle clear, for a beat my reflection lagged, finishing the motion after my hand had stilled. I laughed at the trick of condensation and felt the laugh go wrong in my throat. Dry. Too careful. Sometime after 3, I woke to the house shaking itself, subtle and whole, the way a dream shakes free when you turn over. At first, I thought it was a truck on Broadway, but the vibration carried a syllabic shape, not noise so much as intention. I lay still, counting my pulse and the intervals between creaks. 27. I stopped at the number, not because it mattered, I told myself, but because it had lodged there long ago, and the mind repeats what fits. In the kitchen, the recorder's red eye stared up from the table. I pressed play. No breathing, no rustle, only a thin electrical hiss that reminded me of a TV tuned to snow. The voice braided out of that hiss like a rope being twisted in the dark. "Jonathan," it said, not dramatic, only near. A cupboard door ticked as the wood I realized both my hands were gripping the edge of the table the way people hold a railing on a ferry. By morning, I had built a taxonomy: artifact, stress response, priming. In the shower, I rehearsed how I would frame the anomaly in my note. In the car, a gull rode the updraft beside the ramp and stared me down level with my window, patient, untired. At St. Mary's, the elevator shuddered on the 3rd floor, and the fluorescent above the nurse's station hummed in a key I did not remember from the day before. When I walked past the observation window, Daniel sat with his head tilted as though he were listening to a choir only he could hear. He turned as if on cue, and smiled without teeth, small and relieved, like a man spotting a familiar lighthouse through fog. I lifted my hand. It felt like I was returning a wave begun somewhere behind me. The file shouldn't have mattered. Birthplace, Salem, Massachusetts. The words sat in the demographic block like a stubborn splinter, and I told myself it was coincidence the way one tells a child thunder is only furniture moving. Still, I carried the folder to my office as if it might tip and spill. The rain had polished the city to a black shine. Somewhere a siren braided itself into the hospital's hum. I read through police notes, paramedic shorthand, intake vitals, then a line in a previous charting, An ER visit months ago caught the eye. Patient reports hearing same nighttime whisper his mother described before her death. My throat tightened on the word mother as if it were a fishbone. I kept an old banker's box beneath the lowest shelf, the kind you promise to sort one day and never do. Inside lay Salem's dust, photographs with the color leached to tobacco, a church bulletin, a brittle scarf the shade of a stormy sky. The smell of lemon oil rose when I disturbed it, and with it the staircase from that house. Narrow, varnished tacky under palm. 27 steps that thudded like a pulse when my mother climbed them after midnight. Memory is not a straight road. It doubles back to ambush you. I felt 12 again, listening to her pause on the landing as if counting something I couldn't hear. There had been tapes once, cassettes my father brought back from her therapist, meant for review, never played. I found them wrapped in wax paper, labeled in a neat hand. Session 3, E. Morse. M.D. Dr. Evelyn Morse. A name I had not spoken in decades. I no longer owned a player, but maintenance kept one for staff training. Mark, kind without questions, handed it over with a shrug. In my office, I fed the tape into the deck. Static bloomed, a soft snow, then her voice, alive, impossibly ordinary, saying she couldn't sleep because the house had learned her. Behind it, faint and low, something pressed like weather against glass. I leaned closer, certain it was only room noise, until the undercurrent shaped itself into a cadence I recognized from the recording with Daniel. Not words at first, only a contour, then a murmur. Count with, she began. 1, 2, 3, her breath hitching at 27. The fluorescent above my desk faltered and held. I stopped the tape and the office exhaled as if it had been holding breath with. I called the number I still had for our old neighbor in Salem, expecting a deadline. She answered with the slow caution of the elderly. We talked around the edges. New England winters, the brittle kindness of small towns, until I asked about my mother's last weeks. There was a pause, a teacup set down, a sigh that sounded like the sea. She said it stood just behind her. Jonathan, not a man, a place, like a room that followed. She said if she faced it, it slipped to her back again. I thanked her and hung up before my voice could show a crack. The recorder with Daniel's session sat beside the cassette deck like a matched set. I pressed play on both, staggered the volumes, let them run. For a moment the sounds braided, my mother's measured sadness, Daniel's low disturbance, and then, with the indifference of tides, they aligned. The same lift at the end of Jonathan, the same weight on the second syllable, as if language itself remembered how to say me. I shut everything off. The room did not give the sound back. In the dark window, my reflection delayed a fraction, then caught up, obedient. I told myself this was fatigue, a mind turned on itself, a sun making patterns where there were none. And yet when I reached to return the scarf to its box, the fabric held a little warmth, as if someone had just taken it off at the foot of a staircase I could not stop climbing. I scheduled the second session for dusk, the hour when the city leaks amber into the hospital's long veins, and everything seems briefly undecided. I asked for the small room near the end of the observation court, the one with the cracked ceiling tile shaped like a map of Maine. 2 orderlies stood outside as a concession to my nerves, though I told them it was for protocol. I brought a fresh recorder, a legal pad, and the scarf from the Salem box folded flat inside my coat pocket without admitting to myself why. Daniel sat upright, wrists free, posture of someone braced for. He looked better fed yet more hollow, as if the food had gone somewhere that wasn't his. I set the recorder down, confirmed the red light, and began with the neutral weather of psychiatry. Sleep, appetite, nightmare, the drift of his days. He answered softly at first, making a careful path of ordinary words. Then his gaze touched my collar. "You changed cologne," he said. "I don't wear any." "Daniel," I said, "when it speaks, how do you feel it begin?" He tilted his head, listening, like a room opening behind me. He whispered, "Then it forgets whose mouth is closest." I placed the legal pad between us. "Draw the room." The pencil moved, sure and spare. A narrow landing, a banister, a descending shadow. 27 hash marks along the rail, each darker than the last. My throat He laid the pencil down as if it had grown hot. "Does it have a name?" I asked. He smiled without pleasure. "You prefer names, doctor. They let you file things." The light in the ceiling hummed, stuttered, steadied. I felt the scarf through the coat fabric, the faint warmth it had kept from my palms. "Then file this," I said. "Whose voice is it?" He blinked, slow, and a shiver crossed his jaw like a ripple in a pond. His lips parted. The first sound was not a word, more a pressure cresting the edge of speech. The recorder's meter flicked into yellow. I kept my hands open on my knees. "Jonathan," it said. The syllables weighted as if setting down a box. "You keep stairs in your sleep." The smell of lemon oil rose, clean and wrong in that air. I swallowed. "What do you want?" I asked, softer than I meant to. Continuity, it answered. She fractured. I stood to break the posture, to reassert the ordinary. My chair legs squealed. The note skittered up the wall. The voice followed, unbothered. You carried the blue thing like a relic, it said, and the pocket where the scarf lay seemed to burn through cloth. Something in me resisted naming it coincidence. You're Daniel, I said, as if the naming could anchor him. The smile widened. We are the mouth that stays, it replied. There was a moment, small, precise, when the sound no longer crossed the table but arrived from the hinge of my own jaw. I felt it, the bone buzz of resonance, like a tuning fork struck inside the skull. My tongue moved with a will that was mine, and not mine. The word we left my throat in a timbre I recognized with terror. Daniel's face softened with relief, as though he had been waiting for a burden to change hands. He exhaled, and the room exhaled with him. I clamped my teeth. The effort flashed pain into my temples. Stop, I said, or thought I said. The recorder will tell me later which. For an instant, the world thinned to the point on the second hand as it stepped forward. Then the tension snapped. Breath returned. Sound returned. Daniel sagged, eyes wet without tears. Please, he whispered, as himself now. Don't let it use you. I ended the session. In the hall, the orderlies looked at me the way men do a ledge. I walked past, aware of my mouth settling around my teeth like someone returning to a familiar room. Back in my office, I played the tape. On the crucial stretch, the two voices had braided into one, mine and not mine, perfectly aligned. I watched my reflection in the dark window as it formed the word we half a beat before I did, like a cue from an actor who has learned everyone's lines. I began to measure the change the way a scientist measures weather. Numbers first, meaning later. The scale outside the nurse's station clicked 2 pounds lower on Monday, 3 more by Thursday, as if gravity had grown selective. My belt found a new notch without permission. I told myself I had been skipping meals, but the cafeteria salad still went limp under my fork untouched. Coffee tasted metallic, like water from a blood-warm pipe. Colleagues noticed before I admitted anything aloud. You look pale, said Patel, a man who never commented on appearances. In the restroom mirror, the fluorescent cast turned my skin the color of old paper, and my eyes had that sleepless glassiness I associate with methamphetamine psychosis. At night, I woke to find the sheets twisted tight at my ankles, as if my body had learned a choreography without me. Once I woke to a sound that was only my own teeth grinding a steady rhythm. A patient drumbeat I could not stop until I placed a wooden tongue depressor between molars like a tourniquet. The temperature in rooms shifted when Daniel entered. A nurse joked that he carried a cold front with, but the humor went thin in her mouth. During session, his cheeks flushed with the bloom of someone who has come in from wind. Mine cooled as if air moved through me. When the voice gathered, he brightened the way a man does after a transfusion. I felt the inverse, a lightheadedness at the edge of vision, a clean emptiness under the breastbone. I borrowed a stethoscope and listened to my own chest in the sleep room. The ceiling tiles mottled like a map of disease. The lub-dub was mostly orderly, then a curious pause, a delicate hitch, as if the heart were remembering a step from an old song. Bigeminy, trigeminy, words crowded in. I counted aloud to steady the rhythm and heard myself fall into the old cadence, 1 to 27 before the voice in memory asked me to begin again. I stood so quickly the world browned at the edges and I had to brace the sink until it slowed back from the horizon. Labs came back unremarkable, thyroid fine, hemoglobin functional, electrolytes polite. The nurse who drew my blood left a tiny constellation of bruises on the crook of my arm that looked, by day's end, like the impression of 4 fingertips. I rubbed at them until the skin warmed, then turned away as if I had noticed something indecent. Daniel's appetite returned. He requested seconds. He slept. The night staff said as much with a note of gratitude, and woke with color in his face. You look better, I told him, and caught the echo, a reflexive answer inside my mouth that did not reach the air. We feel better. The recorder on the table made its small, steady red eye, and for a second I wanted to smash it under my hand, to prove objects did not conspire. In the locker room, a shard of mirror above the sink reflected from the collarbone down. The clavicles had grown sharp, architectural. I touched the notch at my throat and felt, for a fraction, a second pulse there, not mine, a faint counterbeat like someone gently knocking from the other side of a thin wall. By instinct, I said aloud, "No," and the sound came out flat, as if the room had already reduced it. I went home early, carrying my coat over my arm, though the March air bit like wire. On the stoop, I stopped, uncertain why the key felt heavier than metal. Inside, the house held its breath. When I undressed for a shower, 5 dark ovals marred the skin of my upper arm in a perfect arc, a grip the size of my own hand. I pressed my fingers to them, and they fit exactly. The water scalded, and did not warm me. Steam blurred the glass into a wavering. Behind it my outline stood, patient and upright, and for a long minute I could not tell whether I had stepped forward or it had. I tested myself the way I test patients who swear the ground tilts under them. I drew a clock, set all the hands to midnight, wrote the date, my full name, the hospital's address. I read a paragraph aloud from a pharmacology text, then read it backward to catch perseveration. The words behaved until they didn't. Halfway through a sentence, my mouth shaped a syllable that wasn't on the page, a dark vowel that felt like stepping into a stair you'd miscounted. I stopped. The room tilted a fraction and righted itself, leaving a nausea that was more idea than stomach. That afternoon I placed the recorder on my desk and clicked it on, then sat with my hands folded, breathing evenly, letting silence accumulate like dust. I whispered the alphabet, then numbers. I hummed a scale. When I played it back, there was a seam where the sound changed texture. I leaned in. After my voice ended, another continued. Not overlapping, not loud, simply proximal, like breath in winter. "We are," it said, as if finishing me. The red light blinked its small obedience while the speakers cooled against the sudden quiet. Sleep grew thin. In the hour that isn't quite night and isn't yet morning, I woke to the sensation of speaking, mouth open, tongue placed, air lifted from diaphragm through glottis, the choreography exact. My own voice came without my thought, gentle as bedside talk. "Jonathan," it said to the dark, not calling, naming. I pressed my lips together until heat sparked at the corners. The voice did not need volume to exist. It sat behind the teeth like a coin. At work I avoided mirrors, then chased them, as if proof lay in reflective glass. The hand-washing sink at the end of the corridor held a sliver of my face when I bent to the tap. My reflection breathed when I blinked when I but the mouth lagged a heartbeat, forming "we" before I felt the. I splashed water up to break the alignment. An orderly walked in, flinched as if I'd been caught at prayer. I told none of this to anyone. Instead, I increased the distance between Daniel and me, scheduling him at the end of day E2, letting nurses fill the spaces between with vitals and pills. In session, he watched me with a patience that mocked kindness. "You look tired," he said in his own voice, the phrasing a mirror of my line to him days ago. I asked about nightmare. He shook his head. "You," he said softly, "not me." The voice didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it entered through the small door of a stray phrase. In the cafeteria line, a child visiting his grandfather dropped a tray and wailed, a blunt, honest sound. I felt the reply arrive in my mouth like a yawn. In the elevator, descending alone, the panel lights stuttered and the word down vibrated in my jaw, not as command but as observation. Crossing Fayette Street, I tasted lemon oil with no source, and had to stand with my hand on a parking meter while traffic folded around me, benign as weather. I sat in on a consult with Dr. Patel to prove to myself I could be ordinary. He presented a case with slides and numbers, and I nodded at appropriate intervals, an actor remembering his blocking. When he asked my opinion, I opened my mouth and heard myself answer in a tone I recognized with lower, too deliberate. "Continuity," I said, and the air around the word Patel frowned, then looked away as if he'd forgotten the question. Afterward, alone, I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and whispered, "Stop." But the whisper came back a half-second later, identical, like a recording played in the room behind mine. That night, I locked all the interior doors to create borders. Kitchen, hallway, bedroom. I placed the scarf on the stair banister the way priests lay a stole, a flimsy ward against a presence I refused to name. I lay on the floor to avoid the bed's associations, and the boards answered with their old language. At 2:13 a draft rose from nowhere, the kind that makes a candle tremble, and I felt a shape assemble behind me. Not body, not weight, but the geometry of a room closing around a listener. My jaw slackened. The first word arrived without consonants. A dark tide. I put my hand against my lips like a child trying not to laugh. The skin buzzed with a patience that did not need my permission. Morning came with the taste of iron. I checked my phone and found a voicemail I did not remember leaving. Silence for 9 seconds. Then my voice saying, "We are almost there," and the click of a receiver replaced by the soft mechanical breath of recorder's end tone. I deleted it and felt nothing, which scared me more. In the mirror above the sink, I studied the little muscles that frame speech. They looked ordinary, pink, alive. When I said my name, the lips formed it correctly. When I said "we," the room answered back by becoming very still, as if listening. I held that stillness the way one holds a match in wind, trembling, bright, brief, trying to decide whether to blow it out or let it burn. By the end of that week, day and night had traded places, and I signed my own leave of absence with a steadiness I did not feel. Exhaustion, I wrote in the box for reason, as if the word could fence off the larger animal moving through me. I left the hospital at dusk, the city rinsed in copper, and drove home with the radio off because the static had begun to sound like breath. I locked the door, then locked it again, as if pressure could replace faith. I unplugged the television to remove reflective surfaces and draped a towel over the bathroom, superstition masquerading as hygiene. I placed the Salem scarf along the banister like a tourniquet. There were 27 steps. I counted them out loud to fix my throat to something I had chosen. Sleep came in segments, thin and glassy. I woke to find myself sitting at the kitchen table with a recorder open in my hand, the reels blinking their little metronome, though I had no memory of pressing play. On the tape, my voice spoke in a calm, night shift cadence, instructions without content. "We will go now," it said, as if to a child. There was a soft friction, fabric against wood, and the recorder stopped as neatly as a page closing. My tongue stung. I had bitten it cleanly, like punctuation. Bruises flowered on my bicep by morning, 5 ovals in the arc of a grip that matched my hand exactly. When I pressed my fingers there, an echo rose from the bones, a faint double beat like a second heart keeping time a fraction behind mine. I stood in the shower until the hot water ran thin and still could not raise the skin's temperature. The towel over the mirror was wet through. I peeled it back and met a face that blinked with me, but set its mouth a breath early, forming "we" before I had decided to speak. An envelope waited on the mat. Hospital letterhead. My name typed with bureaucratic patience. The words arranged themselves slowly, as if learning a foreign language. Patient, Harker, Daniel. Status, missing. A flood of cautions followed. Security report pending. No sign of forced exit. Cameras blank during the interval. But what caught in my throat was a note from a night nurse. Room temperature dropped 12 degrees in 2 minutes. Visible condensation on glass. No footage from 02:13 to 02:21. Those were the numbers on my voicemail timestamp. I checked my phone. The message I had deleted had returned, renamed New Voice. I pressed play and heard only the hospital air, then my own breath saying, "Almost there," in a tone of relief that did not belong to me. I drove back to St. Mary's without admitting I was doing it, the way one finds oneself at a childhood address with no plan to knock. Security wanted statements. I wanted the corridor where Daniel had. The observation window was a sheet of clean dark. For a heartbeat, my reflection sat in his chair, head tilted, listening. I unlocked the interview room. It smelled of lemon oil and cold. The recorder on the table, mine, not hospital issue, blinked red though I had taken it home. I stepped closer and saw my own handwriting on the legal pad. Continuity. We are. The letters were firm, centered, almost elegant. I did not remember writing them. In the charting system, the last note under my name read like a draft I would never compose. Transfer initiate, mouth acclimating. The cursor flickered at the edge as if waiting for me to continue. I closed the window and the screen reflected the room behind me, but slightly misaligned. A degree of backward I felt in my teeth. I called Patel for anchor. The line picked up at once, and I heard my voice answer from the other end, lower, patient, as if speaking across a hallway of mirrors. I hung up before the echo could finish me. Outside, sirens unraveled and reknit themselves. I stood in the parking lot tasting the iron air, understanding with a clarity that frightened more than any panic. If I turned fully to face it, it would step neatly behind me. If I braced my back to the wall would become a door. I drove home holding the wheel like a pulse. On the stairs I stopped at 27 because there was no number after that, which felt true. The scarf shifted under my hand as if someone had just let go. In the dark of the landing, the house shaped itself into a room that was not mine, and very much was. My jaw loosened, my tongue rose, my breath arranged itself. The first word waited behind my teeth, patient as tide. I sat at the desk as the last light drained from Baltimore and the row house took on its evening geometry, edges sharpening where the dark met itself. I had turned off everything that could talk back, phone, television, the clock whose second hand used to tally my nights, and set the recorder in front of me like a communion wafer no one had blessed. The Salem scarf lay across my lap, cool as river cloth. I told myself I would write a note, something sober and legible, a physician's handwriting insisting on order. The pen hovered, then rested. The paper waited without hurry. Around 9, the house shifted in a way I recognized. The gentle settling that always sounds like footsteps when you want it least. I named each sound, ductwork, old joists, wind combing the eaves, like a catechism of denial. When the lemon oil rose, clean and out of place, I stood and climbed the stairs because there was nowhere else to go. I counted aloud, a child's chant in a man's throat, each tread a rung on a rope lowered into a well, 1 to 27. At the landing I stopped. The air there was denser, as if a door had opened onto a room exactly my size. It did not arrive with spectacle. It arranged itself the way a thought does, quietly occupying the seat you had just vacated. My jaw loosened. The breath lowered and widened. I felt my mouth prepare the way a hand learns a keyhole, by repeating the shape until the shape repeats you. "Jonathan," it said, and I understood the voice was behind the word, not inside it, the way weather stands behind a chime. My name belonged to it the way a street belongs to traffic. I tried to anchor in anatomy, tongue, palate, glottis, laryngeal muscles I could name as if naming were leash. I pressed my teeth together until the ache climbed behind my eyes. The pressure became a second pulse, then a rhythm I knew smaller than language. I stepped backward until my shoulders met the wall. The wall yielded the way a curtain, not moving, but admitting. Behind me and ahead of me, the same room. Downstairs, the recorder clicked itself alive. I heard it from the landing, the soft start that always sounds like someone deciding. I went to it because that is what I have always done. Go to the sound, sit where the sound is, offer a mouth. The red light went, patient as tide. I did not press play or stop. The machine did not require me. The reels turned, and for a moment I heard both of us. My breath and the other's breath braided until counting them became pointless. The first words formed in the space between throat and air. "Continuity," we said. A car passed outside, throwing a thin bar of light across the kitchen and over the table where the legal pad lay waiting. The lines slid over my hand. I watched the pen move without hurry, the letters shaping themselves as if they had been practicing in the dark for years. "We are" appeared in my handwriting, the loop on the R too wide, the tail of the G I don't use. Corrections that felt like memory. Somewhere a faucet ticked as it cooled. The house listened with me. I did not call anyone. The phone would have picked up my voice and carried it into other rooms, and the rooms there would have turned toward it gladly. I did not pray. Prayer is a kind of summoning. I sat at the table and set my hands open against the wood. In the window over the sink, the glass found me. My reflection lifted its chin first. Then I did. Then both of us at once. The voice did not crowd. It settled its weight like a cat on a sleeping chest. Gentle, unavoidable, reminding you of what is already yours. If I turn fully, it steps behind me. If I face the wall becomes a door. I understand now why my mother counted. Not to keep the thing away, but to keep herself from breaking when it arrived all at once. The recorder clicked and we waited, attending to the stillness until the stillness answered back. When I opened my mouth, the word was ready, and the house leaned closer to hear how I would say it this time.